Turns out, Titus 2 wasn't a downgrade, it was a promotion. Funny thing, the Titus 2 checklist reads an awful lot like the elder of the church checklist from the chapter right beforehand. The same call to be sober, self-controlled, faithful, almost as if Paul had the same idea of spiritual standards for women as he had for elders in the church. Imagine that. Similar anointing, different arena. You've heard it before. Older women are supposed to teach younger women. The passage that somehow became shorthand for stay home, make casseroles, and be quiet. Somewhere between ancient Crete and the modern day church, teaching what is good became teaching what is palatable. And a passage that was meant to strengthen women was rebranded to shrink them. But before we reclaim the beauty of Titus 2, we need to remember where it came from. A morally chaotic island with a young pastor trying to stabilize new believers, and a command that called older women to lead with courage. So here's the passage in question today. The aged woman likewise, that they be in behavior as becomes holiness, not false accusers, not given much to wine, teachers of good things, that they may teach the young women to be sober, to love their men, to love their children, to be discreet, chaste, keepers at home, good, obedient to their own men, that the word of Elohim be not blasphemed. Paul was writing to Titus, a young leader in the island of Crete, a place in the ancient world that was considered morally unhinged. A culture famous for being, in Paul's own words, liars, evil beasts, and lazy gluttons. In that environment, the goal wasn't to make women quiet, it was to make believers credible. The early assemblies were being accused of lawlessness, rebellion, and social disorder. So let's unpack this bit by bit. That they may teach young women to be sober. This is usually where someone jumps in with,
see, women are only supposed to teach other women.
Right. And I guess by that logic, women should only learn from other women. Sounds silly, doesn't it? If this was about limiting the sphere that women could have impact, characters that we find in the New Testament, like the Apostle Junea, the deacon Phoebe, the teacher Priscilla, wouldn't make any sense. But yet they are commended multiple times. So this passage obviously can't be about narrowing a woman's role to only teach other women, but encouraging the women in Crete who were more morally mature to take young women under their wing and show them how to live in harmony in their household, how to actually love the marriage that they're a part of. It was about having a mentor. You know how they say success leaves clues? Here's Paul saying, don't just leave clues. Show them how it's done. Paul starts with the most visible and influential sphere in the entire community, the home, because that's where faith was on display daily. It wasn't about limitation, it was about leverage. Paul says, teach them to be sober. The Greek word sophronizo. It comes from sophron, which means sound-minded, self-controlled, and sensible. Not quiet or subdued, but being in tune. Think of it musically. A life without discipline is like an instrument out of tune. All potential and no harmony. Sophronizo is about calibration, tightening the strings just enough to bring in the right pitch. This wasn't about lowering your volume as a woman. It was about finding your key. Crete's culture was extremely self-indulgent. Ringing any bells? Paul calls the older women in this community to be conductors of composure, to live with a steady rhythm so that others could follow that melody back to righteousness. The next portion of this passage, to love their husbands and children, flows right out of the sophronizo. Once the heart is tuned, it can make harmony. The Greek words philanthros, to love their husbands, and philaktiknos, to love their children, Both stem from philos, same word for friendship love. It's warm, it's devoted, it's steady. To love is the command, a universal one. Men, women, young, old, it's the fruit of the Spirit. It's beautiful, really. And only a silly goose would read it as anything other than the fruit of covenant. We remember back in Ephesians 5 where it talks about submit yourselves one unto another. And then in the next passage, wives submit to your husbands. And then later in that verse, and husbands love your wives. But I don't hear anybody making the case that only men are supposed to love, and that's not a call that's placed on women. There are two different expressions of submission. Love is a form of submission. It's about getting in alignment with the other person, with the goals that Yahuwah has for both of you. And here we see it. It's a beautiful portrayal of what covenantal love is all about. To be discreet and chaste. Paul adds two words often mistaked as docility, discreet and chaste. Discreet, sophron, the same root as sophronizo, which is what we translated as sober, which is about balance and self-control. And hagnos, what we translate as chaste, has a variety of different meanings, but all of them come down to purity, holiness, and being set apart. Together, these words paint a picture of strength and focus, not timidity. This is not a woman who is quietly fading into the wallpaper. She is composed, intentional, and unwavering. He's calling them to live with integrity so solid that the noise of culture can't throw them out of tune. And this is one of my favorite segments of the entire passage. Keepers at home, because this one has been drastically misunderstood. It wasn't about confinement. This was about calling. The Greek phrase oikourgous, that one's kind of hard for me, oikourgous, the phrase that means keepers at home, combines the word for household and work. It describes diligent stewardship and initiative. If this was about only staying at home, the Proverbs 31 woman would break the rule book. Because she bought land, she planted vineyards, she had merchant relationships and ran commerce, she ran trade, she strengthened her household reputation, and her husband was publicly praising her in the gates. I've done a whole video on the Proverbs 31 woman of valor. If you haven't seen it, that might be a good place to go next. But we have to remember, in the first century, the household wasn't a cage. It was the center of influence. Hospitality, trade, worship, teaching, all happened in the home. Most early church assemblies met in a home. Lydia, Nympha, Priscilla, they all hosted church gatherings. Because our modern idea of church as a building is just what I said, modern. The biblical idea of church is when two or more are gathered together, and most often that happened in people's homes. So when Paul is saying keepers at home, he meant guardians of the sacred place. Women tending to the spiritual hearth where community and discipleship was born. Keepers at home wasn't confinement. This was ministry. Back to the music analogy. Think of it as a stage where the music of faith plays out daily. A tuned heart, the harmony of love, and now the steady rhythm of stewardship. Together they create the kind of melody that makes the kingdom audible to the world. And the last part of this passage, obedient to their own men, the line that's launched 1,000 awkward sermons. I found it interesting as I was researching in this passage that the word that we translate as obedient here is hupotasso, which is usually translated as submission. Same word in Ephesians 5, where it says, be in submission one unto another. Usually we translate hupakuo as obedient. Regardless of the translation choices, the word that's used here is hupatasa, which is about voluntary alignment in a shared mission. It's a beautiful word that describes partnership. Two people walking towards the same destination, the call that Yahuwah has put on their lives, each carrying different strengths that are complementary to one another. And in Crete's culture that was all about chaos, this was less of fall in line and more of walk in step. A lot of these ancient cultures were built on household codes, where in Roman law, the man literally had the right of life or death over the children. So it's kind of a duh for these women that they have to be in alignment, because otherwise they could literally have zero provisions. That's why the cultural context matters so much. This type of language is really reserved for the New Testament. You don't see it over the Tanakh very often. But they were also living in a very different cultural moment in the original Testament. They didn't have the same household codes that they literally were living in and had to figure out how to live life in a hostile environment. So instead of pointless resistance, Paul is calling women to understand, how can you be more effective in the situation that you're in? And it's not by being cantankerous. Isn't that a good word? Where did I just pull that one out of? But about figuring out, where is God calling? Our English word submission comes from a Latin word, which means sub, under, like a subcategory, sub, mission, under the mission, getting in alignment with the mission, aligning yourself with the mission that your husband also has so that you guys can head towards the same destination, wherever Yahuwah is calling. It's not about pointless resistance. It's about finding power through harmony. That doesn't mean buying everything your husband says hook, line, and sinker. Because if we go back to the Genesis blueprint, you're supposed to be the Ezer Kenegdo. And the Ezer was supposed to be the one who rescues, help, and opposes, to bring the husband back into alignment when he's off course. There's just beautiful dynamic of push and pull, but it doesn't work if all you ever do is push. You've got to give and take. And that's what this passage is really looking to. It's join him in the mission. Two working together are way better than working alone. It's the beauty of covenant between a husband and a wife. It isn't about control, it's about collaboration, which is why the word hupatasa, which means voluntary submission, is what's used. Titus 2 and Ephesians 5 are singing the same song. Different verse, same rhythm. Where one says submit, the other says love. Those aren't opposites, they're echoes. In the kingdom, we are all called to do both. Men and women to live in mutual submission, mutual love, modeling the Messiah. The real Titus 2 woman is actually super empowering and extremely beautiful. It's not about baking in silence or shrinking into somebody else's shadow. Perhaps she's even the one building the sanctuary, since the church is meeting in her home, where truth and grace live side by side, where love is loud, and where peace hums quietly beneath it all. The world doesn't need quietly compliant women. It needs grounded, gracious, and spiritually fierce ones. Women who know when to speak, when to stand, and when to steady the room with their presence. This was about composing a way of life, a way that tunes chaos into order, noise into meaning, and ordinary homes into outposts for the kingdom. So if we strip away the man-made molds around this passage, what's left isn't a woman contained, it's a woman commissioned. Teacher of good things, keeper of sacred spaces, and a lover of people and purpose. Sober-minded, self-disciplined, and there to help other people reach God's ideal. Because the call in Titus 2 is never about making women small. It's to remind the world just how big the gospel can sound when it's lived through them. As always, you can find all the information that I covered today in a free downloadable in that description box below. I also have a free downloadable for studying the scriptures in their original language, which will give you a basic overview of Hebrew, Greek, some notes on Aramaic, as well as step-by-step tools to use to help you start digging into these original languages without needing a seminary degree. If this is your first video, leave a comment in that comment box down below and introduce yourself. I would love to say hi. Until next time, remember, he leaves us with an open-ended invitation. Seek and ye shall find. But that implies you have to seek, which is why he also tells us to test everything against the scriptures and hold fast to what is good. May Yah bless and keep you. May he make his light shine upon you and give you that peace that truly surpasses all understanding. If you're looking for a place to go next and you haven't seen it, I would recommend that video on the Proverbs 31 woman. It's a really good place to get more of a blueprint on what the entire identity of the woman looks like. You can find all of the videos on this Biblical Womanhood series linked in a playlist in that description box, or it should be popping up somewhere on the screen as well. I will catch you on that flippity flop. Shalom.